Climate change is melting glaciers, big and small, faster than ever. Most glaciers are close to the Earth's poles, but some are in the tropics, almost entirely in the Andes mountain chain. Those peaks of ice and snow, like the Palcaraju Glacier, have been the hardest hit by global warming.
For millions of years, these glaciers have been virtually unchanged. Just in my lifetime, climate change has caused such accelerated melting that this glacial lagoon has grown in volume by 34 times, and with it, the risk of a catastrophic flood hitting the city below.
The very real risk that the Palcaraju glacial lake could break its banks is making waves across the world. It's the subject of a groundbreaking legal case against Germany's largest electricity producer, RWE. Local farmer and mountain guide Saul Luya is the plaintiff in the lawsuit, which he filed 7 years ago. The case alleges that Germany's largest power company, RWE, should accept partial responsibility for the risk of a devastating flood hitting Luya's home further down the mountain.
Como guía de montaña me ha permitido entender desde la cima que ver cómo la desglaciación está ocurriendo, ¿no? Delante de nuestros ojos, cómo la desglaciación ha hecho que aparezcan lagunas y esas lagunas han ido creciendo.
In May, judges from a court in Hamm, Germany, which is hearing the case, visited the glacial lake. Among a rising tide of climate damage cases worldwide, experts say that's a first.
Yes, absolutely.
Rhoda Verheyen is Luya's lawyer.
This is the absolute first case globally where judges travel from one country where the jurisdiction is to the country where the damage is and to where it is actually climate change related.
The judge's visit, which included court-appointed scientists, could speed up the case. It means an oral hearing could happen as early as this year and a verdict within 2 years. RWE is Europe's second largest emitter and has produced some 7 billion tonnes of carbon since the advent of the Industrial Revolution, contributing to nearly 0.5% of global warming. Luya contends it should therefore pay the equivalent fraction of the $3.5 million costs for the neighbourhood's flood protection, about $18,000.
Exactly.
Scientists like Martin Mergeli, a geomorphology expert at Austria's Graz University, say there's a risk of a, quote, glacial lake outburst flood.
Due to this anthropogenic climate change, it is really more likely that something falls down into the lake, and that the glacier is more unstable, that the probability of a landslide or ice avalanche is more likely. And of course, also here we have to say that as the glacier retreats over this very steep cliff, as the glacier is also, of course, warming, contains more water, it gets more unstable, ice avalanches become more likely, permafrost is melting, as I explained it before, so also the rock slope becomes more unstable.
For now, a small dam is in place, and these tubes siphon off water from the lake to keep the level down. Local authorities have also installed an early warning system. But scientists agree these measures would not be enough in the case of an avalanche from the glacier, which could send hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of snow, ice, rock, dirt crashing into the water. That would cause a tsunami-like wave to break through the lake's barriers and rush down the mountainside, destroying and burying everything in its path. This is the house which Saul Luya contests is at risk of being destroyed by a torrent of mud and rocks. And crucially, if that did come to pass, it would not be an act of God or nature, but the consequence of human-caused climate change. It's not just Luya's home, but an entire neighbourhood called Nueva Florida that lies directly in the flood path. There are 50,000 residents living here who are at risk. The early warning system up at the lake would trigger these sirens. Residents would have between 20 to 40 minutes to evacuate to higher ground. Lawyers like Verheyen say it's another example of how poor countries bear the brunt of emissions from rich nations.
This is the only case in the entire world to this day that looks at the responsibility of private emitters of greenhouse gases to take responsibility for the impacts of climate change in a different country. And for some reason, which I cannot explain, it remains the only one. When we took it in 2015, it was one of the only climate lawsuits in the world, which is now no longer the case. But it remains the only one that actually looks at the emitters, at the private actors, and looks at adaptation costs, essentially.
But RWE does not accept the allegations. It said in a statement, quote, "Individual emitters are not liable for universally rooted and globally effective processes like climate change. Innumerable sources around the globe have emitted greenhouse gases or contributed in other ways to climate change." At Lake Palcacocha, the landmark case has attracted the attention of the press, both local and international. Noah Walker Crawford, an advisor on Saul Luya's legal team, says the case has had a local impact.
The local authorities here in Huaraz, such as the regional government and the National Park Authority, have shown their full support for Saul Luciano Yuya's legal claim against RWE in Germany. First of all, if he wins this case, the money that he wins would go towards lake safety measures, towards these infrastructure measures to make Lake Palcacocha safer. So that's the first point. And important to mention that he's not benefiting from this directly. This is about making the area safer for everyone and all of his neighbors in the city of Huaraz.
Win or lose, Saul Luya's case is at the vanguard of climate change lawsuits for, quote, loss and damage. The amount of money he may win is minuscule on the scale of what needs to be done to provide flood defences. While this groundbreaking lawsuit may set a precedent for climate justice, it's unclear how much his living circumstances and those of his neighbours will change unless drastic measures are taken.